Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the guitarist. It is going to be Dave Wolfenden, who was in Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry, and also played with the likes of The Mission. So, yes, this is the interview. Just a bit of a word up. Sometimes the quality and reception went, and there was one time when his equipment, it just ran out of power. He needed an extension lead with I don't know, electricity. Anyway, look, that's rather boring, but there are moments where it gets a bit strange, and I've tried to edit them out, but I did my best. Anyway, look, after several minutes of casual chat, or quite a lot, we got down to the exciting subject in the world that was music, or is music, of whether it's full-time, part-time, what's best. Dave, tell us more.
I think it's actually more fun when you don't have to do it as a job, because when you're doing it as a job, you forever, it's kind of like, this whole premise of a band is like, so you join with these three other people that you know absolutely nothing about, and the only thing that you've got in common is your passion, which is good. But unlike a marriage, you can't get divorced. And if you have a row, you can't fuck each other to make up. So you just end up carrying the years and years of resentment. And then when you do a good gig, you all look at each other and say, well, we were brothers anyway. I didn't really mean to call you an arrogant wanker. You know what I mean? So... And you shouldn't really pick people to spend so much time with that you know nothing about. It just seems wrong, and sadly there is no rule book, and I think that's why rock does have such a good. There's a lot of mythology around rock, and everyone's got great stories, and that's why, Spinal Tap's great, and that's why Anvil, the history of Anvil is great, and, I've watched loads of documentaries, and you never get bored of the stories because it's unlike any other life, and being put in these situations is unlike anything else, and you're completely fueled by an irrational desire to get your dopamine going for 45 minutes every night. And then you're knackered, then you get pissed, then you've got a hangover, then you do it tomorrow, you sweat it out, repeat, recycle, and you just keep going, which is fine when you're younger. When you get older, you kind of can't do it as much.
No, that's true. Well, I must admit on that front, I love the Fleetwood Mac story, both the 60s one and the 70s, because that's just one of those, That's
a really good one.
They set the bar so high, and it's just like, and the music they created out of that hell and drug-fueled hell. It's exquisite. I mean, anyone calls it soft pop, and it's like, well, I suppose it is, but God, the resentment and hatred towards each other, and it's amazing. That is, and then you got the Peter Green story, and then you had guitarists going mad, or one guy who went to the shops, never came back, and he joined. I think it was something like the Children of God, and another one who was shagging the drummer's wife, and then he had to go, and then it was all a bit like, God, how did you cope, man?
It is amazing the amount of shit you will put up with to get the dopamine going. It really, really is. But also, in a way, there is nothing like it. There is nothing else like it, and this is why we're still doing it, and this is why most of my friends my age are still doing it, because we like creating, we like being in orbit. We kind of are space cadets, and we don't really live in the real world. But the thing about having a job is it does kind of ground you and give you some kind of equilibrium, and think, I don't have to be an arsehole. I mean, when I played with the Mission, the Mission were huge. And they really thought they were going to be the next U2 or The Cure. And I spent a year on tour with them, and I was on tour for a year, which, sounds great. And it were posh hotels and a tour bus and pretty much everything you could imagine. But, that's why sort of Spinal Tap is funny. I mean, Ruth Polsky, she took us to New York originally, and she took most bands from England to America for the first time. And she was involved with the Joy Division stuff and the New Order, and she took the psychedelic first to America. And she told me that she took the Undertones, the first time the Undertones went to America, and she invited everyone round to her flat for a meal. And she said, and these like sweet boys who were like 16 years old, she said, we went out for a walk on the streets in New York. She said, and Fergal Sharkey had his Parker hood up because he was too scared to take it off. And she took Hanoi Rocks to see Spinal Tap, and they didn't laugh at all through the whole thing. And she says, do you guys not think it's funny, this? And they said, well, this is what happens. Why is it funny? Which is even more disturbing.
Yes, this is true. So just briefly on the Mission, was this when you had obviously Wayne, but was it with Andy Cousins on bass? No,
it would be before. I got asked, because I knew Craig from way back in the day with the Expellers and Andrew, we were all part of the F Club scene in Leeds. And so Craig went to join the Sisters, and then I played with the Lorries for years. And then that finished, and Wayne wanted to not play guitar. So I went on the tour and were learning the songs, learning his guitar parts, with an idea that he could put his guitar down and just, I don't know, climb up the PA or some kind of thing that he wanted to. I don't know. It seemed bizarre. At least you feel safe behind a guitar and a bit of smoke. It's not that vulnerable. And so anyway, we set off, and on the second gig in Canada, they had a massive fight, and he just checked out of the hotel, and he were gone. And we were on tour with the Wonder stuff, and it were all, it were fairly big venues, and so we didn't have a show that day. We had a show the next day. So I said, well, look, I know how the songs go. I'll try and learn as many of these guitar parts in a day as I could. So we did the show the next day, and that's how I ended up doing Simon's job.
Right. Bloody hell. That's quite drastic, actually. Because I know that, Wayne. I've done an interview with Wayne, and also done an interview with the bassist Andy Cousin, and probably a guitarist as well, who seemed to sort of float towards anything that was gothic kind of. I can't remember, his name's Mark somebody now.
Mark Gemini Sweat.
That's it.
Yeah, I know who he is. I know all of that. I've never met Andy Cousins, but he messaged me a while ago. To be honest, the goth thing is really, really weird, and it sounds incredibly churlish when to criticise something that's enabled you to go around the world and have a great time. Because, really, we were just punks, and the Lorries really just wanted to be like the MC5. We just wanted to be a rock and roll band. But we used a drum machine and a drummer, and everyone thought we were a goth band, and it was fairly good to us, as it was fairly good to the Mission.
Yes.
And we had a good time for years and years, had a reasonable lifestyle. And then at some point, the Mission, and also the Lorries to a certain extent, you kind of begin to resent this, because you sort of think, well, hang on a minute. It's a punk band. So why is everyone coming in bloody cobwebs, waving rubber bats around on sticks? But then again, you can't say to these people, actually, this thing that you think is great is nothing like you imagine it to be. I mean, with a mission, we did a tour. This is how bizarre it is. We did a show in America and pulled up with a bus. And we had a security guard and all this bollocks, you know. And this was the middle of summer in California. And a woman broke free and she grabbed Wade. And she was wearing a wedding dress and grabbed him and wouldn't let go of him. And she said, we were married in another life. And you're thinking, fuck me, these people actually think that this is real.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, you just can't get your head around it because all you're doing is making a racket.
Yes. But then when you see bands like All About Eve and that period of the was it the Batcave with Alien Sex Fiend?
Yeah.
When all those kind of like like Bauhaus. I mean, there is this there is a look, isn't there? Everyone is looking slightly, and the Cult and the Cure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it does kind of lend itself. They weren't indie pop like the Smiths. They were very much like, we're this kind of dark and moody one, and they start having slightly mystical songs, a bit like Yes, or, you know, one of those bands.
Yeah.
You know, and start talking about gardens and flowing hair, like All About Eve.
Yeah.
It's kind of easy I can imagine that mystical side. You know, Wayne has that mystical character, doesn't he, until he talks about football.
Oh, God. It's really, really funny because, you know, all the people that you mention, if you asked them if they were a goth band, they would say, no, we're not. They would say we're a post-punk band. It's this kind of affectation or a label that you know, I mean, I've always been a massive fan of Killing Joke, and Killing Joke were never a goth band, and the Banshees never were. They were just. And I don't think Bauhaus were. I just think they were tremendously original, tremendously creative, and they kind of wore black clothes a bit like the Sisters, you know. I just think that I don't think it was contrived at all, but then everyone thought it was a movement, and then because they thought that, it became that.
Yes. So look, what about what was your formative years? Because I'm, you know, like I said, confessed at the beginning, I'm in my mid-50s now. Almost late 50s. So
no, it's fine.
It was the, you know, I suppose it was the glam period of the early 70s that sort of caught my imagination. And thankfully, David Bowie was my first single and my first love. What was your kind of moment that music started to encompass your life?
Well, when I was a kid, I'm sorry, I'm just rolling a cigarette. My earliest recollection, my brother, who's sadly deceased now, was a teddy boy. And so he had all the clothes and the draped jackets and, you know, the brothel creepers, and a really, really stylish big brother. You know, like a lot of people, we had a little mono dance set valve record player, and he had things like Chuck Berry and Little Richard. And as a kid, I just thought, this box in the corner is amazing. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, like the vibration of this thing, you know, seemed to possess a tremendous amount of weird energy.
Yes.
That made you feel good, although as a child you don't really have a vocabulary to describe that. So I got into it because my brother was a teddy boy, and then two of the first singles that this is really, really interesting, and I've shared this story with Gerard, who I still play guitar with. The two first records I bought were You Really Got Me by the Kinks and Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum. Oh, and I also bought Satisfaction. And Gerard said, they're, you know, obviously they're like really important records looking back now, although at the time you just thought, this makes a great noise. And the three of the records that have got the most distinctive and iconic fuzz guitar sounds ever. You know, these records kind of created the fuzz sound, particularly with the Kinks, with Dave Davis. He slashed his speaker cone with a razor because the fuzz box didn't exist then, so he cut the speaker with a razor. Keith Richards, that was one of the first records with a fuzz face on, a proper, I think it was a 60s fuzz box called a fuzz face. And Spirit in the Sky has just got a real sonic architecture to it that, you know, is kind of fairly transcendent, you know, kind of does suggest a spirit with the guitar sound sailing into the stratosphere, you know, fabulous records.
Yes. So were you kind of becoming quite aware of that whole kind of 60s movement? Because obviously you're slightly older than me. So you would have sort of picked up that last period of the 60s when it was still peace, love and understanding before Charles Manson sort of started killing people. And Woodstock happened and then the party got a bit sour. You never want to be a...
Well, I think sort of, you know, when I was about, so anyway, you know, carried on, you know, buying records and things like that. I don't think we would, you know, I was too young to think that there's a political dimension to this, or it's because of the Vietnam War. I was too young for that. So I didn't tie those things in. It was purely from a kind of musical thing that I liked it. And I think it were only later when you become a teenager and you start paying attention to the news that you're aware that there's something going on in Vietnam, but you don't know what it is. And a lot of Americans don't agree with it.
Yes.
And then I think it was... you know, seeing Woodstock when I was about 15 and seeing Hendrix do the Star Spangled.
So when the 70s came around and we had that kind of glam period, and obviously people were getting very excited because there was that whole wave of, you know, foot tapping and you know, I don't know, fist thumping sort of music. Was that a scene that you were getting excited about? And I just also wondered when you started to pick up a musical instrument and started thinking, this could be it. I'm not going to just go and...
Do you mean like things like Slade and Sweet and T-Rex?
And Gary Glitter and David
Bowie? To be honest, we would have laughed at that, but with hindsight, everyone knows that were a pretty remarkable time for songwriting, and you know, bands like Slade and Sweet were great. You know, they're economical pop songs, really well written, really well produced, pop music. But sadly, we were listening to Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. That's kind of, so we kind of looked down. We used to call these people teeny boppers.
Yes, teeny boppers. Yeah. So with your music, you didn't, because my brother's 7 years older and he loved Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, but he also loved, yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, Buckley, James Halvers. Did you get into the prog world at all?
No, it would kind of Sabbath and Zeppelin. That's kind of what me and my pals were into. You know, my peer group. You know, we were kind of. I guess we were kind of rockers, you know. It's Led Zeppelin, really, Sabbath,
yes.
And you know, stuff like high energy. But we didn't really like pop music. It had got to be riffy and it had got to be heavy and it had to be 15 minutes long. And so those were all the kind of gigs that we went to see.
Yeah.
And so I started going in 1971. You know, I saw Pink Floyd for 60 pence at Leeds Town Hall.
Bloody hell.
So I was a big fan of Mott the Hoople as well. And people are kind of putting the gig experiences on Facebook now. And we were lucky enough to see David Bowie and the Spiders in Bradford, and that was the best concert I've ever seen.
Incredible. God, that was with, obviously that was with Woody Woodmansey, Trevor Bolder and Mick Ronson.
Yeah, Mick Ronson is just, he is just a god, really, isn't he? He's just really tasteful guitar player, not too many notes, full of feeling.
I think yes, because I was a bit obsessed with David Bowie, and to be honest, he always said that he was looking for the lead guitarist. He wanted his Jeff Beck, and it was kind of then he found Ronno, and that was kind of
truly brilliant guitar player.
Yes. So I was just going to say, so when did you start to think, I might go and try and play an instrument?
Well, I did have a guitar, but no one told me what to do. So I had this summer job while I was waiting to go to university, and I met someone who said, "Oh, I play the drums." I said, "Oh, I've got a guitar, but I don't know what to do with it." So he said, "Look, I'll show you how to play some chords and you can join our band." So I thought, that sounds quite hard. But I managed to do it, and I did it every day for a month. And at the end of a month, I could play Ramones-type guitars, just sliding 2 chords around. And he said, "That's really, really good." But sadly, we found another guitar player. So I just carried on playing for me. And then I met Gerard at college, who was a big Hendrix fan. And I told him, we were about 19. And I said, "Oh, I've got a guitar." He says, "Will you show me what to do?" So I said, "Yeah." So I showed him what to do. And we kind of learned to play by trying to copy Kiss and Thin Lizzy records and AC/DC by putting the needle on the record and trying to cop what they were doing. And we did sort of manage to play these songs in a fairly ham-fisted kind of way and write these stupid songs. But this was round about the time that punk was happening. So we just learned to play, and then the Sex Pistols played at Leeds Poly. And out of the whole tour, there was only Leeds and Derby that survived. And we saw the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Damned, and Johnny Thunders for £1.25. And that was it. And we watched what they were doing, and we knew that we could do that. We could understand what they were playing because we could do it. And we thought, this is great because there's an economy about it. There's brevity. Politically, it's very astute. There's a kind of sociological dimension to it. Let's do it. So we started writing silly punk songs. So in a way, that was a really good catalyst. But we knew that we could do that. What were a lot more significant was when we went to see the Banshees. And we saw the Banshees at Leeds Poly, and we just could not understand what John Mackay were doing. To me, he is the man who single-handedly invented post-punk. We just did not have a clue what he were doing. So then our next thing was to try and figure out how you play guitar like John Mackay.
Right.
And that was a pretty good grounding for post-punk guitar playing, which is how I got into it, trying to play like the Banshees. So that's how I started.
And where did you go to university?
In Leeds.
Right, so you were right there in it. So then what was so before you joined the Lorries, did you sort of form a sort of punk band during that?
Gerard and I had a punk band, but then Craig, who ended up joining the Sisters, the F Club had started by then. And so I started going to the F Club and I met Craig. And then I met Grape, and I met all the Leeds punks, and we formed the Expellairs.
Yes,
And
because Leeds had quite a big anarcho-punk anarchist scene, didn't they? I remember sort of various friends who lived in Leeds during that kind of period in the 80s who were, a lot of people who were really into people like Chumbawamba. And then there's another band called Girls at Our Best who were also from Leeds.
Actually, I used to be their roadie.
Yes, who did that great song called Getting Nowhere Fast.
Yeah, they were friends of mine, and my friend was drumming, and I got asked to go on tour with them and be their roadie. So my first proper tour was roadieing for Girls at Our Best.
Well, that's quite something, because they did a couple of fantastic singles, including
they were great.
Getting Nowhere Fast, and then they did Politics and Warm Gun as well. So by then, I suppose, so that was where, John Peel was becoming incredibly influential, wasn't he? Because obviously...
John Peel was, that was it. And round about that time, we'd got a stable lineup with the Expellairs. So we went to a recording studio, and it was the same recording studio that had recorded the Brighouse and Rastrick Brass Band in Heckmondwike, and so we did a demo there, and we just, to me that was like going to Wonderland. I thought I can actually hear what everyone's doing. It actually sounds okay.
Right.
So we got a cassette, and we sent one to John Peel, and John Peel really liked it, and we got offered a John Peel session. And then we sent one, actually gave one to Bill Drummond, who was in Liverpool, and he formed Zoo Records with David Balfe. And they had the Bunnymen and the Teardrop Explodes, and they liked our little demo, so they gave us a single deal. So we got a John Peel session, and we got a single out, and so there was a kind of little bit of momentum there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because actually there was that whole scene in Liverpool, weren't there? Eric's, where they had Jane Casey and Big in Japan, which was one of those bands. So that everybody was in. So you must have felt a wave of enthusiasm. Did you manage to finish your degree, by the way?
No.
So close.
No, I couldn't do it. Not after seeing the Sex Pistols. I thought, this is what I want to do. So at that time, you could sign on, and I'm playing a band. It was a kind of very benevolent government back in those days. So I was really happy. So everyone was signing on and playing punk rock. That's what we did.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I suppose because Thatcher got in 79, and then you had a huge rise in unemployment. So a lot of people were on job seekers allowance and enterprise allowance schemes, weren't they? So just
that was another way around it. You could get like £1,000 for a year by not doing much if you had a dodgy business plan.
Yes, a good dodgy business. I think you had to have £1,000 in your bank account, which was bizarre.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then you could just sign on, but you weren't classified as unemployed, so it didn't make the sort of the news quite so depressing about what young people were into. But you were obviously on a mission because interestingly, there was that post-punk period. Well, post-punk period, which had bands like the Nightingales and the Fall and Wire and Gang of Four. But then then out of that you had Simple Minds and U2, and then sort of 83 the Smiths came along, which was a massive one. So how long did your Expellairs last for?
Well, we did that for about 4 years, but it were going nowhere. So I just said I've had enough. So I just got drunk for a year, and then. But at our last gig, Chris Reed, who was the singer in the Lorries, had seen me play, and he asked me if I wanted to join the Lorries. And I said, I don't know. I just, want to get pissed for a year and have some time off. And then a year later, he asked me again. And he said, will you meet me in this pub in Leeds? So I went back to his flat, and he said, oh, we've just done a John Peel session. And I thought, this is sounding good. And he said, and we've just done our second single for Red Rhino, and he played it to me, and it was everything that I loved about music. It's still a fucking great record. To be honest, Chris was the first person that I'd ever met that could write a song, because everyone else used to jam, and he could sit down with an acoustic guitar and play, 4 or 5 chords and sing a melody over it. And I thought, God, he's like Bob Dylan, this bloke.
Yeah.
I've never. So Chris was a real songwriter, So we had something to go at. So we just played anywhere and everywhere. We're still signed to Red Rhino Records. We did an album, and it did really, really well. Really well.
Yeah, so you recorded this in the famous Space Ward studios, didn't you?
Which is where Girls at Our Best did Getting Nowhere Fast.
So did you have the famous Mike Kemp? Was he producing that particular one, or was it somebody else?
No, we did. I think that was just with a resident engineer at Space Ward. We didn't have a producer till about the 3rd album. We didn't really know what they did. But what will always gall me is, I mean, we were doing okay, and Play It Again, Sam, who was still one of the largest record distributors in Europe now. They took us on a little tour of Belgium, and we got pissed and everything, and Kenny said, "Oh, so you're doing an album, aren't you?" So I said, "Yeah, it'll be good." I thought, "Wow, we're actually going to make an LP. I can't believe this." So he said, "Who would you like to produce it if you could have anybody?" And straight away I said, "Colin Newman from Wire," because we were massive Wire fans. And then we went again, and Kenny said, "I've spoken to Colin Newman, and he said he'll produce your album." And I thought, fuck yes. And Chris wouldn't do it. And although it did really, although it did well for an indie album, and it were up there for ages, and it got us round the world for a long time, it'll always irk me that how much better it could have been, because Colin Newman wanted to do it and Chris turned him down because it became about a control thing. So it'll always be a massive regret that we didn't let Colin Newman do it.
Yes, absolutely. That is annoying, actually, because he was, he would have been in the business. So during that period, there was obviously, because obviously the indie world of the 80s was pretty huge at this stage, wasn't there? I mean, you had like the NME, who had a huge circulation, Melody Maker Sounds, John Peel. Every city and every town had a venue which had an indie night. So you must have felt during this period that suddenly the wind was back in your kind of sails, and you were sort of kind of on a mission here.
Well, when we did the album, Red Rhino very kindly said, "Well, look, you can sign off the dole now, so we can pay you a small wage." So we thought, fantastic, this is what, we've always wanted to be, musicians, and not have to fiddle your dole money anymore. So we kind of got on a wage and we did it properly. And we did an album, and all the other stuff. We had an agent and a manager, and did lots of traveling and lots of recording. And then we ended up actually signing to Beggars Banquet, which was really kind of ironic, because right at the beginning, 4AD wanted to sign the band, and Chris wouldn't do it, and this is kind of how we got friendly with Exmal Deutschland and Beggars Banquet, is because they'd really, really liked the demo that the Lorries had done, but Chris, he thought this is giving too much control away to, so all these things are things that we should have done and we didn't. But
did you have management at that stage, or were you sort of
we did, we had a manager,
Was he any good?
Dave, he's got a massive heart. a really, really massive heart. And he only ever did things for love. He would never. I think we left owing him quite a substantial amount of money, and he just wrote it off.
Right.
You know, he didn't chase us, and and he subsidised the band for years. He used to be in charge of the fly postering scene in Leeds, which was kind of run by crooks.
Yeah,
the illegal fly postering.
Yes, it's quite something when you're at an age where you sort of go around a town or city with a sort of, your big paintbrush, which is kind of, obviously a bucket of glue, and stick up posters everywhere. Good days.
So he was in charge of the fly postering scene in Leeds. Right. And also we were friends with John Keenan, who started the punk thing in Leeds. So those two people from Leeds, Dave Hall and John Keenan, were the most two important people in Leeds to be friends with, really.
Yes, and obviously Beggars Banquet, which was kind of part of Situation too, which was part of Beggars. They were quite. I mean, I can see why you would have gone into the goth kind of category in a record shop, because they were their stable of bands was all pretty gothy, wasn't it?
Yeah, they really liked us, and the band should have signed with them from the beginning instead of messing around with Red Rhino in North. Although it kind of worked, they didn't have the profile that 4AD had. The music would have really, really fitted with 4AD.
Well, yes, they had the arty. As a fan, 4AD always had that slightly arty sort of quality, because for various reasons.
Amazing. It's still an amazing back catalogue with 4AD, the 4AD stuff.
Yes.
4AD and Factory have got the best back catalogues by a mile.
Yes, that's true. Anyway, look, so as the 80s were progressing, it's interesting because 83 to 87, indie pop was at its height, wasn't it? And that was also the years of the Smiths. And then sort of they split up, then Ecstasy appears, and then things start to change again. How were you kind of maneuvering that period? Because obviously you start releasing albums almost every year at this stage, because you do Paint Your Wagon, Nothing More, and then Blow, which you did 4 albums in a space of about 5 years, which is quite good going.
I mean, we just kind of toured, and then when we weren't on tour, we did writing. We had a little recording studio. Then we'd send a demo tape to Beggars and say, "We've got 4 new songs. Will you pay for us to go?" And so they'd just book us into studios, and it was great. We ended up at the Manor in Oxford, which was Richard Branson's house. And we thought, God, I can't believe it. Sort of sleeping in Richard Branson's bedroom. It was absolutely amazing. And so we were in the studio, but, Mike Oldfield had done Tubular Bells. And at the time you did have to pinch yourself. God, you used to think, I was just sitting in my bedroom with an acoustic guitar, 15 years ago, with not being able to play a chord. And then here we are in the studio where Tubular Bells were recorded, and it's free, like someone's paying for us to do this shit, So it was great fun, it was truly great fun. The 80s were great, but like most things, the only certain thing in life is that it will change and it will evolve like a person, like a virus, like COVID. It will change.
Yes, well, because most bands have that 5-year narrative, don't they? They kind of get together, they have a honeymoon period, like you were talking about your marriage kind of metaphor.
Yeah.
And then you sort of do the first album, you get some fans. Well, most people get a John Peel sort of play on their first single, then a John Peel session, the album. Things are going well. Then the slight tricky second album, mainly because people have started asking about what's happening with money or, management or creative direction. But mostly people are starting to sort of want to have a few, I don't know, I suppose it's to do with asking questions, isn't it? It's like, you know, how does this all work now that we're sort of a band and we're not signing on and stuff like that? So often the second album, which was in your case, Paint Your Wagon.
I mean, the first album, I think, and it's true of most bands, the first album is made up of songs that you've played up and down the country. So they're already written. You know,
Yes.
you've already got enough for an album because you've been playing, and you can play them because you've been doing gigs every week. So the first album is easy. Then when that's done, you think, shit, we've spent so much time on tour that we've got no songs. So how do you do it? So how you do it is you just start jamming again. And it really, really helps if there is a songwriter in the band, which were Chris. He is a proper songwriter, you know. He can do it. He doesn't just jam, he writes a song, you know. And so that was the greatest asset that we had, was his songwriting ability.
Yes. And then did you, I mean, obviously from there, you know, you do the second album. Your albums are quite short, aren't they, in length?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is because it's interesting when you were talking about pop music, because what we really, really liked was this kind of a short, sharp blast of like energy, which we kind of thought was what punk was about, and it undoubtedly was. It wasn't like, you know, Aquatarkus or Tales from Topographic Oceans. It was, you know, brevity, energy, a blast, a zap, like the MC5. But what we also discovered later was that we also had shared a massive love of Tamla Motown, and, you know, their songwriting, probably the finest pop songs ever made, and the best produced pop songs and the best ideas. You know, the Tamla Motown catalogue would put any post-punk catalogue to shame. They are the finest songs, I think, ever. And so we kind of tried to take this thing on board with like having loads of energy, but also loving the songwriting skills of, like, you know, the Temptations or, you know, or the Supremes, because they're undoubtedly brilliantly constructed and produced pop songs.
Yeah.
So we kind of tried to do both, like the song and the energy. And that was our kind of manifesto in a way.
But when did you, you know, as you progressed then, because you don't break up on the second album, which is good, you're doing well. But then the third album, Blow, I mean, that's quite a change in vibe, isn't it? A sonic.
Well, nothing wrong with the third album. We did that. We kind of wrote it between touring. But the last album, we actually decided that we were absolutely sick of using the drum machine. So, and we wanted to make a rock album with a real drummer that sounded warm and analog and not overthought and really, really well recorded. So we found an engineer that was sort of sympathetic to this, because he'd kind of grown up with 70s, the kind of music we like, 70s blues bass rock, and was really, really into things like miking techniques and the purity of sound and nothing digital. So we just kind of wanted something that, and in a way, I think, you know, we thought, well, you know, let's not do a goth thing. Let's just do good songs with a real drummer, well played, with lots of, you know, that has a sonic architecture that still sounds like us, but, you know, without doing what we've done before. And it actually got us dropped from Beggars Banquet. We spent a year making it, and then Beggars Banquet dropped us. But I think with hindsight now, people really, really like that album. It's my favourite album. It's definitely not a goth album.
Yeah,
I
and
think it's more something like.
I was going to say, because you sort of get a lot more sort of into the songwriting yourself on this, don't you, as well? Are you still there?
Yeah, yeah.
I was just saying you're sort of you're becoming more involved with the actual songwriting, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I kind of absorbed this through osmosis. I'd watched how Chris did it, and so one day I had an idea for a song and did it by myself. We had an 8-track and a drum machine, and I knew how to work it. And then we went into rehearse, and I said, I've written a song, and I sang it, and I played it to him, and the Sisters of Mercy still play it live, so it must be quite a good song.
Which one's this?
Gift That Shines. So that was the first song I wrote by myself. And someone told me, they said that Andrew really likes that song that you've written. And I said, oh, fuck off, like, that's bollocks. And they said, no, he doesn't. I thought, yeah, whatever. And then the Sisters started playing it live, and I thought, Christ, he really did like that song. So I went to see the Sisters, and they played it, and it did bring a tear to my eye.
I was going to say that must have been kind of an emotional moment. So then, because at that stage, the ecstasy world had sort of exploded with the dance scene, and then you had the Seattle grunge scene, and then and the 90s suddenly appear. So the 80s obviously start to sort of wane.
I think it was an interesting time because things were definitely changing, and so that I'd done a year with a mission, and I really threw my guitar in the corner and said, I don't want to do that anymore. So, I bought a sampler and an Atari computer and learned how to do sampling at home. So that's how I got involved in doing MIDI and technology and sampling, which is where I'm at now.
So did you walk away from the band, the Lorries, at that stage? Were you?
When we got dropped by Beggars Banquet, there was no money. So I had to go and sign on, and I just said, look, I'm out. We've spent a year doing an album. It's got us dropped. What the fuck do any of us know? We've done something we really believe in, and we've ended up back on the dole again. So I said, I'm off to sign on. So I was signing on again, and then Mick, who was the drummer in the Mission, said, look, we're going on tour. Do you want to play guitar for us? And just come with us and you pick it up. And so I did, and then Simon left, and then I did that for a year. And then I was really burnt out, and then lived in Glasgow and sort of spent a year learning how to do sampling and sequencing.
Yes. Blimey. And but at that stage, I mean, the Mission were a major band, weren't they? Doing major.
They were absolute. But in a way, what they kind of, it always felt like they were overreaching. They really, really wanted to go up to the next step of being like The Cure or a kind of, third or second level U2. And it seemed feasible, but I think that seemed to be driven more by commerce rather than what the band felt they should actually artistically do. So when the dance thing happened and Nirvana started, Wayne did a solo album, and I think it's a kind of mishmash of like folk songs but I think that it was an incredibly confusing time because he wasn't a fan of Nirvana or Big Black or Killing Joke, which, would endure any change because the music is so rooted in what the band want to do that there is no way that they will, veer off and do some weird experimental album. They will just carry on doing what they do because that's what they do. And Wayne seemed to think, well, I'll do something different now. Didn't want to do grunge, didn't want to do electro. So I think it left him confused about what to do. because times have.
I was going to say, I guess at that stage he'd been sort of doing music for a good 10 years and had sort of hit some quite high moments. So, and I suppose there was, people get tired, don't they? I would have thought that being on the road and sort of, the kind of lifestyle of being in a rock band must wear you down slightly and confuse you, as they said about Spinal Tap and Nigel. So,
well, the thing about it, I think at the end of the day, you will put up with an awful lot of shit to play to 3,000 people going mad every night.
Yes. How did you feel sort of suddenly not having, well, you had the Mission period, which must have felt quite enjoyable, and having the audience, but then when you sort of walked away from, the Lorries and then stopped with the Mission, did you feel kind of an emptiness as well?
I just really just wanted a rest from it. I just really wanted to learn about, how to kind of create music by yourself with a sampler and a computer, because it meant not relying on people. It meant not being disappointed by people. It meant people not making promises that they couldn't keep. And it was nothing about money. It was purely for fun. Yes. And I've actually ended up back in that place now, which is where I think a lot of musicians are, because as a lifestyle, it's not sustainable anymore.
So what happens throughout the rest of the 90s then, sort of musically, and then sort of up to the current day? Do you sort of, are there other, did you play in any other bands that's, for those years?
I just did stuff at home, and I think my partner and I bought some houses, and we did them up. And she was doing pretty well. She was a designer, so it was her turn. It was her turn to be in a band, and yes. I was happy to stay at home and do some painting, which I found thoroughly relaxing.
And when sort of like, do you sort of keep in touch with any of the, like the Mission or the Lorries at all?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Lorries were supposed to be playing at Future Armour next year in Liverpool. But I don't think Chris will do it. I still see Craig, who plays in the Mission, and Simon. Craig plays in Spear of Destiny, so we've done some shows with them. Yeah, they're friends, I see Simon and Debbie from Sheffield, they're very dear friends. So we've grown up together, there's a lot of love, we sort of know each other inside out, the good bits and the bad bits,
Yes, I guess you would have seen. You mentioned kind of earlier, the Red Rhino experience. Did that sort of, with this as your manager, Dave Hall, did you sort of ever sort of have any form of completion with that kind of relationship with him, or did you just all feel a bit embarrassed? Well, not embarrassed, but
I think what happened was that because he'd subsidised the band for years and years, when we signed to Beggars Banquet, it was the first time we had a reasonable amount of money. And we said, look, we want to take control of this, and we want to be responsible for paying our wages out of our account. And so, we had a massive fallout. And with hindsight, Dave was right. He said, look, I've subsidised you for years with my cash flow from the postering. So now it's only fair that you reciprocate and let me use your cash in my cash flow, and I'll still pay you wages. So that didn't really stick together. So we just said, right, we're going. And then he said, well, you still owe me £30,000. And we said, well, we can't pay you. So he wrote it off, and we're still friends to this day.
Oh, well, at least that's good, Anyway, then. So so with this kind of interesting period of lockdown, and having spoke to quite a lot of musicians like Miles and I suppose during that period, I mean, he was quite lucky because he had sort of done a lot of the touring and an album the year before. So he was planning to have 2020 as a sort of a quiet year and hopefully write material for this coming year, which obviously is not really going to happen. Have you found the kind of, lockdown and creativity?
Well, I'm doing an album with a singer from America, and I'm just in the process of finishing the final song. So it's nearly there, and I've spent a year doing it. It's mostly electronics.
Yes.
And I met. I've done some stuff with a band in America called The Wake, who were playing in England. And through The Wake, I got in touch with someone called Caroline Blind, who had a band in America called Sunshine Blind, who did okay. And I did some guitar playing for her album, which is called The Spell Between. And then I said to her, look, I'm doing kind of sort of electronic trip hop, I really need to learn some new skills, and actually it's something you can do at home by yourself with enough electronics. You don't need pals there, which has been good for COVID. So we did a batch of 5 or 6 songs, and they're finished. And then we're just working on the last 4. And so then we'll have enough for an album. And then I take those to my friend who lives in Manchester. I don't know whether you know Ding. Ding plays in the Lorries, and he runs a studio in Manchester. And he made a lot of records with The Fall, and he's made records with everybody. But technically, he's the bass player in the Lorries still. So between us, we kind of exchange all the files. Then, I go to Manchester with all the stems, and then get Ding to chuck out all the shit and then put a few good bits in, and then hopefully it sticks together. And we've got an album, so it's nearly there. So that'll be coming out this year.
Fantastic.
But so in a way, the lockdown has been okay for me because I just moved house at the beginning of it, and I've got a little room where I can do the electronics and carry on writing the songs. And I don't know whether people will like it, but we'll like it. It's definitely not the Lorries, and it's not gospel music. It's I always wanted to do something where if you're coming from work and you're like making your beans on toast or whatever, and you want to listen to something just while you're making your tea, without it assaulting your ears like Big Black or Killing Joke, something that's kind of cool and has got good beats and good sounds and good songs. So it is sort of very electronic. I've always been a massive fan of the Young Gods, absolutely.
Oh, right, yes. To
me, they're the guys who know about sequencing and sampling. So I thought, well, maybe I could try and do something like that. So you just get better at it.
Yes. So when did you, just at the beginning, you mentioned that you'd done some recording with Enid. Which album and what material was that? God.
That was when we did. Open Up. It was the first single for Beggars Banquet.
Right.
So I think we were there for about a week, and we did 3 songs. And we did that with Bill Buchanan, who did all the Nephilim stuff. And he'd also done stuff with the Leather Nun, who we really, really liked. The Leather Nun, I thought, a really great band.
Leather Nun, yes, absolutely. God, they're a band I'd forgotten about, actually.
Yeah,
yes.
So Bill did most of the Leather Nun stuff as well. So we thought, great. He's in. We like the leather nun,
Yes, and so just with the Enid, I'm always curious because they're such a sort of interesting and quirky band.
It was really weird. It was really, really weird.
In what way?
I don't really want to say, but it was just a really, really strange atmosphere. But like we really I think they call him Robert, who's the main man, and we just picked up a new amplifier from the railway station, and we were staying in Robert's house. And this amp had been delivered to the studio, and I think we got a bit stoned and a bit drunk, and I was saying, I'm really, really dying to hear what this amp sounds like. And Chris was saying, well, yeah, we can do it tomorrow. I said, no, let's plug it in now. And he was saying, oh, that's a really, really bad idea because everyone's in bed. So we did, and it were really just turned it on, and it were on full, and it caused a massive shitstorm. And so anyway, it kind of went downhill from there. And it was just a really strange setup. It was just very odd because there seemed to be this, I don't know, almost like a commune. When you go to a studio, you generally have like I don't know, like it seems organised, or this was sort of like sharing someone's house and their family there. And it just felt like you were intruding all the time. It was just really odd. And so we'd upset them by trying this amplifier, and,
Yes, tricky. I know, community aspect. I suppose I thought you were going to say cult. It was more like a cult, but more of a community.
It was just odd. I've never been anywhere like it,
Yes. And look, just last question then. I mean, if you could have said something to a 16 or 18-year-old self starting out, and with all the experience and wisdom and experience you've had, I just wondered if there was anything you would have just said to that person that you'd have thought, God, that would have been really useful.
I think it would be, don't let anyone tell you that you can't create something of value, whatever it is, whether it's painting or writing or music. Do it, but don't rely on it to be your main income. Do it as a hobby and a passion, but don't mix art and commerce up, because when you keep them separate, it's easier. Then you've got two things. Be a plumber and be a painter, or be a gas fitter and play the drums, but don't do one, do both.
Yes, this is true. Well, look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this, Dave. This has been brilliant.
Thank you. I hope it's been okay.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A big thank you to Dave Wolfenden, who has played, as we probably talked about, Red Lorry and Yellow Lorry. Just Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry, and also The Mission. I think we just spoke about that actually in the interview. Anyway, look, that's the end of the show. Thank you ever so much. If you want to contact me, I don't know why, you might want to. You can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just do C86 Show. And also, I've been archiving all these interviews for years. And they're all available on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, just do C86 Show. So anyway, that's it. Have a good week. Stay safe.